Thanks, Fauzi and panel. It's always interesting to see what to invest in next, and thanks for giving us some insights and making these really complex industries more understandable. Now we're going to move on to the first sponsored announcement for the day. Can I welcome to the stage Tom Blaksley, Partnerships Manager from What3Words.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name's Tom Blaksley. I'm from What3Words. To give a little bit of context, What3Words is a UK-based company. There's about 60 of us based in London. With a presence in Mongolia, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and a little bit on the West Coast in the US. In short, What3Words is a global addressing system. And I just want to cover a couple of things on why that's important, why that's useful, how it works, and some of the bits of work that we're doing. So this is really why we exist, is because actually, in many cases, it doesn't take much explaining, but the world is fundamentally poorly addressed. According to the World Bank, actually about 3/4 of countries in the planet have sort of non-existent or poor, just inadequate address systems. So think street numbers, house names, postcodes, and the like. And we could take an example from here in Beirut, where you can see that actually mapping generally is actually very good. Very often you will have street information and the imagery, but it's when you try to talk about a specific point on that map. When you want to drop a pin, that's when you get the sort of the unnamed road at the bottom and just a set of coordinates. And that's despite the fact that very often you have lots of people and families and businesses living and working there. And this problem doesn't just apply to places like Lebanon, but everywhere, even in the UK, which is a relatively well-addressed market. In London alone, for example, there are 25 streets named Church Road. And then in other scenarios, you get decent addressing systems, but they're in the wrong language. And in an increasingly globalized world where we're all moving and hopping back and forth between cities, this presents a challenge. And then this may seem a bit over the top, but it's actually an example from a friend of mine who spoke at a TED event in Beirut about the nature of addressing in Lebanon. And this was the example that he gave of really what his address was, how he got directed people or services to his home. And I'm sure for people here, sort of these sorts of very long-winded, detailed descriptions will be quite familiar. And then this landmark sort of referencing description-based addressing system that we've come to use is reflected by the businesses that we use in our day-to-day lives, whether it's e-commerce or food delivery, or even on Facebook. Facebook, when you list a business, has an option that says, I don't have an address, and then it gives you a drop-down of sort of where you want to reference yourself in comparison to the nearest landmark. And then, of course, this is the other thing that we end up spending a lot of time doing, is repeatedly sharing our location over WhatsApp or other messaging services. And it's sort of, it's half the solution, but if you want to do it over and over, or if you're not standing in the location you're talking about at that moment, or if you don't, like in this case, if you don't have a perfect GPS fix, actually it's not an ideal solution. And the second you want to talk about that WhatsApp pin, the second you want to repeat it, reuse it, take it out of that digital environment, actually what you're left with is these. And coordinates, as beautifully precise as they are, aren't really particularly human-friendly. It's unlikely that I'm ever going to ask somebody to meet for a drink at 25 degrees, 9 minutes, 40 point, so on and so forth. Very easy to make a mistake. And then if we think about just think quickly on sort of why this is so important when we think about the different industries. There's actually a huge number that are directly and seriously affected by or dependent on good addresses, whether it's government services, registering to vote, opening a bank account, emergency services, calling an ambulance, e-commerce, logistics, travel and tourism. There are a lot of things where actually location and being able to talk about location is important. So we decided to sort of try and build a simpler way, an easier way of talking about location. And the way we did that is by dividing the world into a grid. So you can think of it as this global grid, okay, of 57 trillion 3-meter by 3-meter squares. And what we have done is we have basically assigned each one of those squares a label made of 3 words from the dictionary. 3 random words, what we call a 3-word address. And then by turning coordinates into these 3-word combinations, we're able to very easily talk about location with the precision of the former, but actually the ease of the latter, the ease of words. And what that means is suddenly places that never really would have had a formalized address all of a sudden do, and we can talk about really anywhere on the planet. And even places where addresses are actually quite good, now we can talk about location with the precision that's required in an example like this. We worked hard. We wanted to make sure that this was as global a system as possible. So we've developed What3Words in 22 different languages now. So every 3-meter square on the planet has an address, has 3 words in each of these 22 languages. So it doesn't matter where you are or where you want to go. And on top of that, we work to accommodate for the mistakes that humans still make. So words are, of course, a lot easier to remember than sets of coordinates, but we still mistype, misremember, misspell. So we've taken similar addresses and put them in vastly and very obviously different places, so that when you make mistakes and making fat-fingered entries into our application, for example, we can intelligently suggest the location you're after based on things like your current location. But that's sort of the consumer app, and that's one side, but the core of our work actually lies in building this tech through an API and an SDK into the services of partners and other businesses who need better addresses from those aforementioned industries, like whether that be emergency services, e-commerce, navigation, mobility, so on and so forth. So just to run you through a couple of examples on that, one of the things we did quite early on was start working with the United Nations. So this is their publicly available disaster reporting app. So anyone can take a photo of an incident, say a flood or a broken bridge, or just where someone needs help, and that photo will be automatically stamped using our SDK offline with a 3-word address, so that location can be communicated to recovery teams down the line by voice or in writing. Then at the other end of the scale, we've started working with the likes of Domino's Pizza, so they can take and receive 3-word addresses from their customers, so that they can, actually don't have to make that phone call when they're 100 meters away and make sure the pizza arrives nice and hot. Regionally, ArabNet is one of our major clients and partners. We've worked with them to get all of our tech built into the back end and also to their front end sort of consumer-facing apps. And what that means is that when they have a shipment that has a 3-word address on it, their drivers are able to navigate to that exact spot without calling or asking for WhatsApp pins. On top of that, ArabNet and the other carriers and shipping carriers we work with, they're able to offer that functionality onto their e-commerce partners. So this is an example from a fashion e-commerce store in Saudi Arabia. You can see when they're collecting the address information as an additional little piece, they're taking the 3-word address of their customers. We work hard to build plugins across all of the major stores. We work with e-commerce partners to basically slot them into their end systems, so that they can then pass those on to the carriers and deliver for the reasons that people shop online, to make their lives easier. And then just changing tack slightly and thinking a little further ahead. Some of those industries are sort of quite traditional and obvious use cases, but it's worth thinking also about the way things are moving and sort of evolving tech trends. And 2 great examples of that are things like just discussed, autonomous cars and also drone delivery. And if we're serious about sort of this type of future tech, actually we need addressing systems that are sort of sufficiently precise and sufficiently usable for people in day-to-day. So we're working with these guys on the left, build autonomous pods in Dubai as part of their initiative to get driverless cars on the road, and on the right is one of the grocery drone delivery companies we're partnering with as well. And then finally, one thing I really wanted to highlight was not just on the autonomous side, but on voice and on voice navigation. So it's no secret that we're moving more and more away from text entry and mouses and keyboards and tapping away on screens to voice. And actually, What3Words to date is the only addressing system that is not only works, but it was actually designed for voice technology. Anyone who's tried to input their destination into a traditional sat-nav in their car by speaking an address will be very familiar with the frustrations. So that's why recently we brought Mercedes-Benz on as a major client. So they have integrated our voice tech into their vehicles so that people can just say, "Hey Mercedes, take me to table, chair, lamp," and get there. And there's a short video here on how that works. Which should have sound.
Navigate to What3Words, Cool View Spark.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a nice overview of what we're doing and how we're just trying to make sure that everyone everywhere has an address and make our sort of day-to-day lives easier or more efficient or safer. Thank you very much.